Well, good evening, folks. I am very pleased to welcome you this evening to our Real Lives Night event here at Stirling University Christian Union. The page you're currently watching on is the Stirling University Christian Union Facebook page. I would encourage you to click on that page after this event is over and have a little look at the other stuff which is going on for the rest of this week. We're doing an online event every night. And aside from this week, we do lots and lots of other stuff. So I'd encourage you to go and click on the page and find out a little bit about what we are about. We are a Christian union, and we exist to give every student at the University of Stirling the opportunity to hear and respond to the good news of Jesus Christ. However, tonight we are expanding our mission not just to Stirling University, but to the whole world, given that this can be watched online. And if at any point tonight you would like to ask any questions, feel free to fire those into the comments, and we will maybe be able to get those answered live. However, please keep them sensible and related to the topic this evening. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our visitor on tonight. We would both like to apologise in advance for our terrible Northern Irish accents. Of course, we are Stirling Uni, but tonight we're going Northern Irish. So, Billy, what about you? May I ask? What's the crack? How are you doing at the minute? And tell us a very brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, well, the folks are going to get a bit of my story tonight anyway, so I'll keep the introduction brief. Yeah, you know, we don't have to interpret folks how the crack is. Crack's good. But yeah, I'm not living in Northern Ireland at the minute. I'm living in Lancashire, just north of Liverpool. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to join yourselves tonight on the mission. So yeah, I'll expand a little bit on my experiences during the course of this interview, so people will get a wider appreciation of where I'm coming from through the interview.
Good. So, Billy, forgive me for saying this, but you look like more of a slightly older man. So you will have lived through some particular events which happened in Northern Ireland during the 60s, 70s, 80s. So you lived through the Troubles. For those of us who don't know what the Troubles is, could you maybe give us a brief introduction to what was going on there?
Yeah, no problem. I know some of the students are from Northern Ireland, maybe even Southern Ireland. So just a very brief synopsis. All right, Ireland has been plagued with problems going back centuries. There have been many attempts to bring about a resolution to those problems. 100 years ago in 1921, Ireland was partitioned. So you have 6 counties to the north, 26 counties to the south, an independent Republican state, 6 counties to the north still linked to the United Kingdom. Within the northern state, there was a very sizable Roman Catholic minority that didn't want to be part of the United Kingdom. They wanted an All Ireland. So really the seedbeds of violence were right there from the inception of the state. And periodically, over the past 100 years, there have been outbursts of violence, but 1968-69, trouble erupted on the streets of Belfast and Derry, and the violence that continued for 3 decades were just called the Troubles. But yeah, that is a very crass sort of overview of Irish history, like. Yeah.
Thank you. So obviously you were growing up through the Troubles. So what was life like for you growing up in the Troubles as a child?
Yeah. Hey, well, the Troubles started in the late 60s. Okay. Now they didn't happen in a vacuum. I think there was rumblings of, trouble through the 60s, which I wasn't aware of as a kid. I think my parents did their best to shield me from all of that. So growing up in the 60s, that whole cultural revolution Certainly, from 62, 63 onwards with the Beatles and all of that. I had an older brother and an older sister who, as teenagers were into the whole pop scene. So yeah, it was a very happy home, growing up in that era. My mum and my dad, older sister, older brother, and then myself and the younger sister. And my mum, she used to go around the house cleaning, and I can remember her singing country songs as she cleaned. I got a bit of a sort of love for country music today as a result of that. So it was a very loving home, a very united home, very happy home. And when the Troubles did erupt in 68, 69, looking back, I don't think they really caused me any degree of angst. It was a novelty as a child to see troops on the streets with their armored cars, the rifles, the barbed wire barricades, etc., that they put up. That was more of a novelty. I wasn't aware of the seriousness of what was unfolding. But really, what really grabbed my interest as a little boy was JFK's statement at the beginning of the 60s that by the end of the decade they would land the man on the moon. And see that Apollo program, watching that as a little boy, that fired my imagination. So yeah, that's what was captivating my mind as a little boy, more than was unfolding on the streets of Belfast or Londonderry or further afield, in Paris, etc. You had the student riots. So yeah, it was the moon and what's beyond they were my dreams as a little boy.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, the 60s sounds like an awful lot went on in that decade worldwide.
Yeah,
sounds good. So obviously, when you were a young teenager, something quite traumatic happened to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was just before I hit my teens, Cameron, and it was at the very beginning of the Troubles. I think most people in 68, 69 thought, the Troubles would only last a short period of time and then it would peter out and die down as it had done previously. But as I say, it went on for 30 years. And just as the Troubles were escalating at the very beginning of those Troubles, Saturday the 27th of June 1970, my dad was shot dead by the IRA. He wasn't the first civilian to be shot dead. He was among one of the first civilians. And yeah, I think he's around about the 40th or thereabouts person to be killed. But that had a devastating effect on the home life, Cameron. That happy home was plunged into sadness as a result of what had happened. There have been many families touched as a result of the violence that emanated from Ireland, Northern Ireland during those years. And my family don't have a monopoly of violence, but we reacted with hate as a result of what had happened. No justification, obviously, for what I eventually ended up doing, but yeah, when trouble comes to your doorstep, people react differently.
Yeah.
I certainly wanted revenge.
Yeah. And do you think why do you think your dad was shot? At the time, did you understand that, or reflecting on it, have you thought differently about why your dad was shot?
He was just coming home, having been out. I think my mum said he hadn't been out for 13, 14 weeks.
Okay.
And that Saturday night, he decided to go out and see his friends. I think maybe what would have, looking back, there was trouble in the west of the city that day, and a number of people were killed. And probably seeing it all on the news, he went out to see his friends in the bar to talk about what was happening. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he went out that night, and they were coming back to our house for something to eat. that night. It used to be the custom in the province, when the men had been out drinking on a Friday or Saturday night, they would all land back in somebody's house, and the wife would do a meal for them. So they were coming back to our house that night. My dad had run on ahead he said to them, I'll go down ahead of you, and I'll get my wife to get the tea pad on. But as he turned a corner, IRA gunmen opened up. It was about 11:30 at night. There was a blast of automatic machine gun fire. Several gunmen opened up, and I can still hear that gunfire, and right throughout the whole night there was this constant shooting. So there was. That was my dad being shot dead, and indiscriminate shooting. Just people knew, the people who were shooting knew whoever they killed on the other side of the road was the enemy as they perceived it. So it was just totally random shooting. They were just out to kill anybody who they perceived as the enemy.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously for you and your family, that had devastating effects, understandably so. And you were saying earlier how you felt like you wanted to get a little bit of revenge. And so a few years later, when you were 16, I believe, you joined the paramilitary. Could you explain a little bit about what that word means, what the UVF is essentially?
Yeah, well, the paramilitary group's basically a terrorist organization. I didn't think the security forces would have provided me the opportunity to get the revenge that I was desiring, and the security forces had to play by rules, but the IRA, the Republican terrorist group, weren't playing by any rules. So I thought the only way to fight terror was by terror. So I joined junior wing of the Ulster Volunteer Force, one of the most ruthless of the loyalist terrorist groups. I remember the night I joined, as a young 16-year-old, getting into the bar, and the commander of that unit saying, what do you want to do? What activities do you want to be involved in? And I remember saying, I only want to kill. Meaning Roman Catholics, because I blamed the whole of the Roman Catholic community for my dad's death. And I wanted to inflict as much pain on that community as I was feeling and my family were feeling, right? That's how I was feeling in 1974 when I joined this group, okay? And I said, I just want to kill. And I remember him laughing and making a gesture with his hand, to about 50, 60 or so young lads behind him in the bar. And he said, you have to wait your turn. There's about 60 people in front of you. And that's what I found frustrating, that I was in a queue, that I wouldn't be able to accept my revenge as quickly as I wanted to. So yeah, that was my initiation to the UVF. And it basically became a full-time terrorist. Just my whole life was wrapped up in the organization.
Yeah. So that that's mad to think that you coming in with that desire to kill, you weren't even really an anomaly. And there was, as you say, there's maybe like 40, 50, 60 guys also want to do the same thing before you. So what sort of commitment was required in the UVF by yourself?
All right. Yeah. Well, you're told before you go in, there's no way out. The only way out's in a box. Okay. You don't leave in this total commitment, which I wanted to give anyway. There wasn't going to be any argument in that. And so, yeah. And there was I guess in some respects it was like a big gang, there was the camaraderie and that unity that you had with like-minded people, but there was also a brutality with it, because once you stepped out of line and one heard of folks stepping out of line and what happened to them, So yeah, that it was ruthless. But yeah, the ruthlessness suited me because I wanted, to exact that revenge, as I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was the organization.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of things tied up in there. Just want to say to everyone watching at this point, remember, if you'd like to ask any questions in the comments, please do feel free, and we'll maybe have time at the end to answer those questions. So Billy, obviously you joined the UVF wanting to kill. Now you actually got round to that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened on that day and what was going on in your head?
Yeah. Yeah, it was 45 years ago next Friday. Okay, the 19th of February. And it's a day that's indelibly printed on my mind. I was asked to carry out this shooting. Initially, I was told that it was an IRA man, which was great. But then it was actually told, no, it wasn't an IRA man. He was actually a member of our own organization, but he was an informer. Well, everybody in the organization knows that the penalty for informing was death. So if this guy was an informant, then the rules were he had to die. So himself and another accomplice went out that Thursday morning, picked up a couple of guns, and went to a derelict street in East Belfast to await this person turning up for work. But I think it was maybe about 10, maybe 10 past, 7:15. He turned up, parked his car, and we stepped out of the house where we were hiding, and cold-bloodedly, mercilessly killed the guy as he was parking his car. There was no twinge of conscience or anything. There was no there was no holding back. It was just, as I say, cold and callous and bloody and brutal. And we made our getaway. Nobody, humanly speaking, saw us doing that shooting. As I said, it was derelict street. It was early in the morning. I don't even think the police. Well, it's not. I don't think. I know the police didn't turn up until about 20 minutes after the shooting. By that time I was in Harlan and Wolf. Going in to do a day's work.
Mm-hmm.
So that.
Right. Okay. So, Billy, thank you for your honesty in that as well. That's obviously maybe not the easiest story to always tell. But yeah, so you sort of, I guess, already told us, your reaction to killing someone at the time. You didn't really feel any sympathy or anything really. You just wanted to kill someone.
Yeah. When my dad was killed, like as I said, that family that was united in love and happiness suddenly found itself united in sorrow and grief. And people talk about radicalization these days and what radicalizes. Your dad being brought home in a box, certainly puts one on a road to saying, I want revenge. My mum was 3 months pregnant at the time my dad was killed. 6 months later, the day my kid brother's born. And I can still remember him as a wee boy running in off the street and asking what a daddy was. And then all of those things fuel the hate, and the whole family it was like a cancer, became embroiled in this hate, which became increasingly dark. And so yeah, I wanted revenge. And when I went out and killed that guy, as far as I was concerned, within the organization, I had proven myself. By the grace of God, a number of other attempted murders and planned murders didn't come off. But now I'd actually done the dastardly deed. I'd proven myself, and I was going to go on a killing spree. There was nothing going to hold me back. You know, that is how I was thinking at that time.
Yeah. Thank you for your honesty and for your rawness in explaining that. So after all this happened, then you ended up in prison. What was prison like in a nutshell?
Right. Yeah. In a nutshell, right. Well, here, see the type of activity I was involved in, Cameron. I was either going to end up dead or end up in prison for a very long time. They were the only two scenarios. So getting arrested wasn't such a big shock to my system, okay, because the type of activity I was involved in. And I was arrested 2 weeks after the shooting. The police that came out in the trial arrested me due to what they called information received. So in other words, the irony of it, somebody within the organization had informed on us, okay? And getting into prison, I was placed into a part of the maze prison that solely held members of my organization. So I was placed in a UVF compound, and it was run along military lines. We had a special category status. And there was no sense of shame. There was an element of pride. You know, it might seem odd to some folks, but there was no stigma attached to, you know, prison in the mid-70s in Northern Ireland if you were arrested for a politically motivated crime. So, yeah, I felt, you know, a degree of pride of being in there with, you know, people with a similar mindset to myself. So that wasn't a big shock to my system. Here, what was a shock to my system was the very first order given to myself was in the prison I would encounter members of the Republican movement, but I hadn't to say anything that would offend them. So I would encounter the enemy when I went on family visits, make court appearances, see my solicitor. And I was told, don't be saying anything to them that will cause them to react violently to you. And I was assured that they would not say anything to me that would cause me any upset or, you know, to react violently to them. And that was a surprise. That was a shock to the system. You know, you think where the conflict would intensify would be where the protagonists are being held in close confinement, and yet they had thrashed out an agreement and were, you know, living life quite peaceably. And I couldn't get my head around that. Like, you know, that was a shock. That was the biggest shock to my system. The fact that these guys had come here, worked out an agreement in prison, and were coexisting, you know, quite well together within the regime.
Yeah. And I mean, understandably so, given the past experience and circumstances that were there at the time. So you ended up meeting someone in prison called Peter. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about him?
Peter's a character. You know, I was arrested in March '76. Peter was arrested. I was arrested at the beginning of March. I think he was arrested near the end of March, a few weeks after me. So we spent our remand time together. Now, after I was sentenced, because of the way things were working out politically in Northern Ireland, after I was sentenced, I was transferred to the H blocks, an entirely different ball game to the compound system where I was on remand. If anybody's familiar with the history of Northern Ireland, from the H blocks, you have the Republican protest, the blanket protest, dirty protest, where they smeared their excrement on the prison wall, and then the hunger strikes, which maybe most people have heard of. That all stems from the H blocks. Okay, so I ended up in the H blocks after I was sentenced. And Peter, he also ended up in the H blocks after he was sentenced. And lo and behold, when Peter arrived in the H blocks, he was carrying a Bible. Now, Peter was not carrying a Bible the last time I saw him, you know, before he was sentenced. But all of a sudden, he's carrying this Bible and talking about Jesus. And I'm thinking, you know, Peter is a real hypocrite. He's a phony. He's just been given a life sentence. He can't face up to the pressure of the penal system. He needs a crutch. And the Bible in this Christianity is a very convenient crutch. Yeah, but he designated himself the block barber, when he arrived in Yates blocks. So anybody that needed a haircut had to send for Peter. Now, Peter had never cut anybody's hair in his life, but you had to send for Peter if you needed a haircut. And there was a method in Peter's madness, because he knew that once he had you in the chair and was cutting your hair, he basically, no pun intended, but he had a captive audience. And he just would talk and talk and talk about Jesus, and see if you didn't want to know anything about God or religion or anything. The last thing you wanted to hear was this Peter fella talking about Jesus. Because after my dad was killed, God did not feature in my life, period. If there was a God, he could have stopped all the pain we were feeling as a family. So God was written out of the picture. And I say, Peter cutting the hair, and I remember he used to do this on a regular basis. When he was cutting people's hair, he would get the scissors and put them in the side of the neck, and he would apply a fair degree of pressure, and he would say, I just need to push a little bit more, and I'm into your jugular, and you're lying here in a pool of blood, and see, by the time they get a medic down this wing to stem the flow of that blood, you're dead, and you're not a Christian, and you'll be in hell. And so that was Peter's evangelism, so it was. And see, if you just wanted a bit of peace, I used to have an Afro hairstyle in the 70s, I used to let it grow and grow and grow before I sent for Peter, because I knew what he was like.
Yeah. That's funny as well, because I've actually heard someone give me the advice of when I'm going to the barber to talk about Jesus, because they can't get away from you.
That's right.
Yeah, your experience has clearly been different than that, Billy.
Yeah.
So when you were in prison, you started to get some post. Tell us about the post you got.
Yeah, this is bizarre, but this is how it happened. All right. I started to receive magazines from New Zealand. I only ever opened one of these, and I pulled it halfway out of the envelope, and I caught the name of Jesus in the corner. Okay. And I put it back inside the envelope, curled it up in a ball, and threw it in the waste paper bin. Absolutely no time for God or religion. 6 or 8 weeks later, another one of these magazines. Now, there was a handwritten address. There was only one mistake on this handwritten address. My prison number was 691. Well, these folks had written G91. That was the only error on and it was addressed to myself. It's Block 7 of the Maze Prison. New Zealand stamp, New Zealand postmark. Now, Cameron, to this day, I do not know anybody in New Zealand. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is just how it happened. Okay, these magazines are coming.
Yeah.
They're going in a bin. Peter Thompson is still running around the place with his sort of novel approach to evangelism. And I thought, well, these magazines are coming from the other side of the world. They're going into the bin. Peter's into this religion. I'll give them to Peter. He could make use of them. And I started to give them unopened to the prison officer that would have brought the mail to my cell, and tell him to send it over to Peter Thompson, who was housed on the other side of the H block. And in 1980, it was August 1980, I went out to the medical room for headache tablets one night, and Peter happened to be in the medical room. And I said to him, I hope you're getting the magazines I'm sending over. I don't know who's sending them, but Peter, you're quite welcome to them. And before Peter could even answer, the medical officer, he became a good friend, a guy called Joe Martin. The medical officer looked up and he said, "Oh, do you not think it's God who's sending you these magazines?" Now, Cameron, I'd never heard anything as ridiculous in my life. God sending magazines from New Zealand to the Maze prison. And I told this medical officer that I didn't believe in God, that I was skeptical about God. Now, usually if I said that to the likes of Peter Thompson or any other Christian prison officer, that I was skeptical about God, I didn't believe in God, they would always come back with a quote from the Bible, which I now know is from the book of Psalms. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So I was waiting, and this medical officer called me a fool. And then I was going to throw him a line of argument and get offside. And I remember him looking at me And he said, "Oh, you don't believe there's a God?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right. And I know what he's going to do. He's going to call me a fool, because you can read these Christians like a book." And he said, "Oh, you're skeptical about God?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm skeptical about God." And he said, "Well, I want to tell you something, kid. Regardless of whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't take away the fact that there is a God. Nor does it take away the fact that if you die in the state that you're in the minute, you'll go straight to hell. And once you get there, kid, you won't be skeptical anymore." He said, "In fact, you will be a believer, because everybody in that place believes." And the tragedy of it is this, that once you're there, there's no release date. You're there forever. And I couldn't hit him, with the line of argument for "you're a fool." I wasn't expecting that response. He had wrong foot at me. And I got my headache tablets and I turned and hightailed it out of that medical room. And not expecting that response, I guess a seed was planted. If there's a heaven and a hell, well, there's no argument. Like, I know where I'm going, but is there a heaven and is there a hell?
Yeah.
Is there even a God? Like, what religion's right? Because here I am in this prison, encountering these Christian prison officers and some Christian prisoners. And you know what's really annoying about them, Cameron? It's a dogmatism. They're so dogmatic, and this crass arrogance, like, their Jesus is the only Jesus, their Bible's the only Bible, nobody else gets a look in. And so that was rubbed me up the wrong way. So I did with these Christians, like, they were just so dogmatic about their faith and about being right. But hey, a seed was sown, Cameron, and I started to ask lots of questions. Some of the questions weren't serious. Like, they were just, I thought, if I can throw a curveball to one of these Christians, that would leave them flummoxed. It would just show how pathetic their religion was. So it was at times, they asked serious questions, but most of them are just, dopey questions, like.
Yeah. And you know what? I love that line that you said there, from the medical officer. Whether or not you believe in God or not doesn't deny the fact that he does exist.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean that cuts deep, but very, very challenging. Indeed.
I remember here. Sorry for interrupting you. Hey, this is an exclusive for you, Cameron. That's what just popped into my head. I remember talking to Joe years afterwards and saying, like, "Do you remember that night in the medical room?" He couldn't remember it.
All right. Okay.
And I said, "Do you not remember saying this?" He says, "I've never used that line in my life," he said, "but it's like something I would say." So he had no recollection of it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like, but anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So then after all these things happened, you started thinking a little bit more about big questions. Is God real? Is Jesus real? And a woman came to visit called Gladys. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Gladys? What happened there?
Yeah, Gladys was a fascinating wee character. She taught mathematics in Methodist College in Belfast. I think she had just retired. Did you go there?
No, absolutely.
No, you heard about it. But here, she was a member of the Board of Visitors, which are like a penal watchdog, people drawn from civilian society that come in and make sure the prisons run along humane lines. And Gladys was a Christian, and she shared her faith to everybody in prison. And she came down to my cell Christmas Eve 1980, and after a bit of formal conversation, she just simply lifted down the Bible and she began to read the story of the crucifixion from Luke chapter 23, the account of the two thieves who were crucified either side of Jesus. And she's simply just reading this portion of scripture, and as she's reading that portion of scripture, for the very first time in my life, I come under a deep conviction of sin. Now, I couldn't put it in that sort of terminology back then. It was just, for the very first time in my life, I felt guilty. See, prior to this, I did not feel guilty. Went out and murdered a man in cold blood. I did not feel guilty. I stood in Belfast High Court on the 12th of May 1977, found guilty by an earthly judge, and did not feel guilty. If you had have asked me were my actions justified, I would have tenaciously argued that I was perfectly just. All right, you would have walked away thinking that guy's a screw loose. How can you justify murder? But I would have been arguing I was perfectly justified. Okay, so there's no sense of guilt, but she is just simply reading the Bible, the story of the crucifixion, and there's a part of that narrative where the thief, one of the thieves, crucified on the other side of Jesus, said, "This man has done nothing wrong. He's innocent. We're guilty." And it was at that point I felt, yeah, I'm guilty, and Jesus is innocent. I realized that. That all of the evil that characterized my life, Jesus Christ knew none of it. Suddenly, I was very acutely aware of the innocence of Jesus Christ and my guilt, my evil. And see, running in tandem with that, and it's really strange, I realized why Jesus Christ was on the cross. That he was dying there as a substitute. Yes, so the hell that I deserved and the punishment that I deserved for my evil, he was bearing that on the cross. That became perfectly clear. Now, how does that become perfectly clear? It only becomes perfectly clear because God's working in the heart. Okay, flesh and blood doesn't reveal this to you. Yeah. The Spirit of God that night, as that woman read that portion of Scripture, convicted me of my wretchedness and my need. My need to be saved, to be born again, to use a biblical term. But I knew if I didn't settle things that night with God, if I didn't settle accounts that night, I would have been lost forever. And that woman, when she'd finished reading, I said, "How do you become a Christian?" She said, "It's as simple as ABC. You know what you learn in primary school? Accept that Jesus Christ died for you, believe it, and then go out and confess it to others. Accept it and believe it on the basis of what I was experiencing." I know it's subjective, but I was feeling this overwhelming sense of guilt. Yes, accept it and believe it. Yeah. Confess it to others? No way. There was no way I was going to have to tell people I was a Christian, because I knew what I thought about Peter Thompson. He was a hypocrite. He was a phony. He needed a crutch to lean on. So, but hey, she must have. I wasn't saying much, I think I remember just was sitting with my head bowed. Then she left me with several portions of Scripture. Just read a few more verses from the Bible. One of them was John 6:37. All that the Father give to me will come to me, and he who comes to me, I will never turn away. I think she left a few wee gospel tracts and left the cell. But that Christmas Eve night, I got down on my knees in the cell. It's block 7 of the Maze prison. I didn't know what to say. I think there might have been a little prayer on the back of one of the tracts, which I prayed. How theologically accurate it was, I don't know, but it was a prayer that was prayed from the heart, that God would save me and accept me. And there was no flashes of lightning or anything, or claps of thunder. It was a simple prayer of faith, And I believed what she said, that verse that she read out, if I come to God, he will never turn me away. And I grasped that and I said, right, I've come to you, God, as I am. I've confessed my sin and I'm going to believe that you will never turn me away. And I just grasped that and held on to it. I guess if there was anything subjective, Cameron, see all the hate and all the bitterness and all the anger and all the rage and everything, it went immediately. And I felt clean. Okay. I felt clean. And, it does talk in the Bible. Jesus talks about being born again. And it was like that. It was like, I've been born all over here. And I realized, God's not in the business of handing out crutches. I thought, Peter Thompson needed a crutch. God gave me a new life, a brand new life. and that's what happened, that Christmas Eve night.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So, like that night, as you say, it was, maybe a simple prayer, but just the overwhelming guilt and stuff that you felt. You felt that you were being born again, born from
Yeah,
above, and essentially recreated into a new being,
yeah.
which is amazing. And I'm gonna take a couple of questions from the floor, because I think this is maybe the right time to ask
Okay.
these. First one is, in any way, does the man's death, that you killed, does that still haunt you, or how do you cope with that nowadays?
Oh, oh yeah, of course you don't take the life of another human being without it haunting you.
Mhm.
You know, killing a human being isn't like killing a fly,
Mhm.
where you walk away and forget about it. As I said, that 45 years ago, next Friday, I will relive, that morning, and I can still, as I'm sitting talking to you now, see that murder. It's like it's clear as you on the screen, Cameron. It's like a video loop in my mind. I can see it as
Yeah,
clearly as it was 45 years ago. Yeah, you don't take life without it impacting you, without thinking about the person, of course. And if I could turn the proverbial clock back, yes, I would. I do deeply, deeply regret my actions. I regret that I ever took up the gun before I took up the Bible.
mhm,
I regret, what I brought into the home of another individual. He was
mhm.
an only child. His mum had died a few months before. His dad died, I think, in the late 80s. But yeah, um, that haunts me. Yes. How do I live with it? The only way I can live with it is the fact that, yeah, I plant my actions for evil, but God brought good out of them. As I can't turn the clock back, I can't change what has happened. I live with the consequences of that action every day, will do until the day I depart this world. I just got to get on with life, as best I can. And, you know, try to turn the negative experience into a positive experience, share with people, what has happened, share the pitfalls, talk to younger folks when I get the opportunities in the past to go into prison.
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, you try to bring a good out of the negative. See, with every negative you encounter in life, you can bring a positive out of it.
yeah, that's amazing. Um, so obviously, Billy, what we're saying now, from the start, before you became a Christian, you were a totally different person, to who you are now,
Mm-hmm.
and you've changed. Jesus has made a massive change, in your life. And so since becoming a Christian, I'm just going to ask you a few questions about what your experiences have been, and these tie in a little bit about the questions that we're getting from the floor as well.
Okay.
So, firstly, so when you were in prison, and you sort of your early days of being a Christian, it makes me think of the Apostle Paul, who writes the letter to the Philippians from prison,
Mm-hmm.
with so much joy. But obviously, most of us haven't really had the experience of ever being in prison. When you were in prison and had been a Christian, did you feel like you had all you need in Christ at that time? Um,
Oh yeah. I mean, nobody is content in prison. Okay, and everybody's always wanting out. But see, after I became a Christian, I realized that I deserved to be there. I had committed a horrendous crime, and I was being punished for it, and justly so. So I didn't show any mercy, right? So I I didn't deserve any mercy, and I realized that. So I was content in prison as a Christian, and I had a peace in prison as a Christian. Okay, um, and I had a joy in prison as a Christian, even during the difficult times. Um, when there were periods of intense violence. Yeah, when I had to go to the paramilitaries and say to them, I'm not following you anymore, and I'm not taking orders from you anymore. I've got a different commander, and I'm in a different army. You know, Jesus is my commander, and I'm in Christ's army. You don't walk away from paramilitaries. They rule by fear. But even, you know, in the grip of fear, you know, still at a peace that the past understanding, as Paul writes to the Philippians. And I remember the first time I heard, I'm going off on a tangent here, Cameron. I remember the first time I heard that letter, part of that letter being read in prison. It was an old Presbyterian minister, right?
All right.
When the paramilitaries were planning their dastardly deeds, they all used to congregate in a church service. Now, nobody went to church or anything. So the prison authorities knew there was something afoot when all of a sudden, you know, you had about 100 guys turning up at church. And the reason they were turning up at church was because they wanted, you know, to sort of plan their protests and everything for the incoming week. So we had to go out to church one day. And this Presbyterian minister started to read from Philippians 4, where it talks about rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And I'm sitting saying to myself, does that guy know where he is? You know what planet is this on? You know, what an insult. I think this was about 1979. Why is he coming into this place reading from that book that talks about joy? You know, he hasn't a clue. And I remember him stopping when he read that passage from Philippians, and he said, you know where this was written? He says, this was written from a Roman prison. He says, nothing like anything you guys are experiencing. And boy, you know, looking back, that was a little sort of link in a chain, you know. I'm saying, but because I was in prison and I wasn't happy. So how can this guy write about joy in prison? And I saw that in the likes of Peter Thompson and others, that they had a joy and a peace.
Yeah.
How did they have that joy and peace in prison? Because their environment was exactly the same as mine, and I didn't have any peace. What was it about those guys? And I remember one time a prison officer coming up and whispering in my ear as I was looking at Peter Thompson. And he whispered in my ear, he said, do you see what Peter Thompson has? Peter Thompson has what you need. He's got Jesus. Another little link. Yeah, that's why. Is that why Peter Thompson is content? Is that why he's joyful? So yeah, I knew exactly, you know, after I became a Christian, what Paul was talking about in that letter to the Philippians.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I know that's yeah, it's just such a great letter that Paul writes. For those of you who are watching, this is the book of the Bible where a guy's writing a letter from prison, but as Billy's described already, he just has so much joy in Christ, and he feels like he has everything he needs, even though he's in prison. Billy, we'll maybe have to do just a couple more questions before we have to tie things up. But basically, so, you know, Billy, in the past, you know, you've killed someone. Most people out there would probably think that you're not good enough to go to heaven. But Billy, you know, do you think you're going to heaven? And what makes you good enough to go to heaven?
Well, nobody's good enough for heaven. That's the first thing, okay? Yeah. Because we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God, so nobody's good enough, okay? I know from a human perspective, we put people into sort of categories and say, well, that person's better than that person. Like, see if you're using me as a measuring stick and saying, well, actually, Billy McCurrie's committed murder and he says he's going to heaven. I've never committed murder. And so if he's in, I'm definitely in, you know. Well, here, I'm not the measuring stick. You know, Jesus Christ is the measuring stick. You have to put your life beside Jesus Christ's life. And Jesus Christ's life was perfect. Now, that's the entrance into heaven. You know, you got to be perfect, okay? So none of us are perfect. So on earth are we going to get into heaven? Okay, so you have to put trust in somebody who is perfect, Jesus Christ. That's why he went to the cross. So our sin, our wrong is imputed to him, and his goodness is imputed to us. So his perfect life is imputed to us. And it's because of what Jesus Christ has done that I know I'm going to heaven. Now, you know, people can say, yeah, you know, look what Billy McCurrie's did, and I'm deeply, deeply regret that, as I say. But here, it's not such a surprise or a strange thing that God changes the likes of me. He's been doing that for millennia. You know, the guy that was crucified him was probably a first century terrorist, and Jesus saved him. King David murdered, you know, the guy who gave us the Psalms, you know, the greatest king in Israel, committed adultery and killed the guy's wife to try and cover up his dastardly deed. Moses murdered, you know, the guy that led the children of Israel out of Egypt and give us the law. God used them to put the law down. Yeah, all of these guys murdered, you know. The Apostle Paul, through whom we owe much of the New Testament, he was an armchair general to the murder of the first Christian martyr. Give the nod for him to be killed. So, like, you know, God's been in the business of changing the lives of people like me for millennia, you know. So yeah, I have absolutely no doubt that I'm going to heaven on the basis of what Jesus Christ has done. Not that I'm good enough, because nobody's good enough. It's Christ is good enough, and everything. I rest my whole eternity on the birth, the life, the death, and the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amazing. Yeah. So, you know, as you say, you've summed up very well. It's not just about being a good person or a bad person to go to heaven. It's who Jesus is and what he has done. And as you say, whether or not we accept, believe and confess. Great. So obviously, Billy, now you work as a church pastor. So why did you choose to do that?
All right. A good question. Here, there's no better message worth, you know, proclaiming than Jesus Christ changes lives. Like, you know, why would you want to do anything else? And obviously, it's God who calls into the ministry. It's God who puts the desire in the heart. But hey, see when the life has been so wonderfully transformed, yeah, that's not something to keep secret. You want to share that. And do you know what Ireland needs, north and south? Ireland, north and south, needs Jesus. Do you know what Scotland needs? Not independence. Scotland needs Jesus. Do you know what England needs? England needs Jesus. Wales needs Jesus. Why? Because Jesus Christ transforms lives and changes them for the better, not for the worse. So yeah, wouldn't want to be anything else other than preaching this wonderful gospel.
Amazing. Billy, we've been chatting for quite a while, and there's so many things which we can continue to talk about, but I think we're going to have to wrap things up just now. But thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you for being so honest with us. Thank you for telling us a bit about your life story and how Jesus has changed your life completely. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, for you guys watching, I want to remind you that Stirling University Christian Union has so much other stuff going on this week. Again, if you click on our page, which you're watching on at the minute, you will see that tomorrow night we have a Guerrilla Christian event. On Thursday night we have a talk, and on Friday night we have an escape room, which is very, very exciting. But make sure you get in contact with someone from the Christian Union before you sign up to that one. We're doing our events week is called Something More. We hope that you learn something more. We hope that you gain something more from this week. There's a feedback form which is going to be posted in the comments section of this video. We'd really encourage you to fill that out so that we get an idea of how we can improve our events from your perspective. Last thing I'd want to say, I can't plug this highly enough. Billy has said so many times tonight about how he's read the Bible. The Bible's had such a fresh impact on him, and through hearing stories in the Bible has really, really changed his life and made him think totally differently about his life. So what better thing to do now than try and pick up a Bible and read it for yourself or read it with a friend. Here in the Christian Union, we use this resource called Uncover. It's very simple. It's just one book in the Bible, the Gospel according to Mark. It's a story of Jesus' life. And the book takes you through a series of studies which are very, very accessible for anyone, even if you don't know anything about the Bible at all. If you don't have the book, that's fine. The entire resource is free online at www.uncover.org. please feel free to get in contact with a Christian that you know or someone you know from the Christian Union, and we will happily do this study with you. I can't plug that highly enough tonight. So thank you so much for tuning in. We wish you a very good night, and that is goodbye from here.